brain just loves to create patterns. So it's going to use the pattern that it understands, not the pattern that's best.
This too was a sports psychologist when I played at Fordham University. We worked together for 4 years. I think I took the opportunity starting from my freshman year, and
I think so.
I'm always about like personal development and self reflection. So I wasn't hesitant about taking the
Yeah.
advantage.
Hmm.
But I know sometimes players just don't take the opportunity when they have it for free, even. But yeah, I'm happy. I know you, and you helped me so much. And I think one of your like niches within sports psychology is mindfulness, because you also have this Do So app, which is about mindfulness and meditations. And you were literally the first person who introduced me to mindfulness, and you pushed me to proceed on meditations. And I know in the beginning, I wasn't as committed. First, I
Hmm.
was very like into it. And I remember even like we were discussing it, and I was saying, like, wow, I can't understand why people are not doing this.
I think I remember that as well.
Yeah. And then what really helped me was when I had my concussions, meditations was one of the things that helped me like the most in terms of like just balancing out what I was going through. But I tell you now, for the past 2 years, I'm like meditating every day.
Hmm.
And I'm very mindful. I even had like tattoo. I don't know if you remembered,
I've seen that. Yeah.
but mindfulness, which reminded me to be in the present moment. So thank you. This is all you. You got me on the right track.
I love
And
that. I love that. I really do. It, 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 it literally means so much to me. I got a text message from somebody else that I'd worked with years ago, and they came back around and asked me some things, and then followed up with a nice text. And when I think about this work, and I'm sure you've now experienced it now, is it's the opportunity to, I don't want to say change or whatever a life, but it is certainly to impact a life in a positive way. And the idea of like somebody never have done mindfulness, does it, likes it, sees the benefits, but maybe doesn't fully see the benefits, and then 5 years, 6 years, whatever down the road comes back to it even more and now understands it more deeply and it's like, I will never not do this. And it's so good for our brain. It's good for it is the workout, it's the exercise for the
mhm,
brain. And I don't and you could probably tell me now more than I could tell you because of your probably greater depth of research recently on um, good exercises for the brain. But in my experience, there is no better exercise for the brain if you want it to be healthy. And so for me to have introduced you to that, and I get it in terms of like what you're saying, because that was kind of my experience. I did it for a while, but didn't fully get it and understand it. And it wasn't until probably 8 years after I had begun the first time of being introduced and kind of building a habit. But it was probably 8 years in before I
mhm,
actually was like, whoa, this is like I'm understanding it at a whole nother level. And I have barely missed a day in since that moment. And that was had to be a decade ago minimum. And
mhm.
I miss a day, couple days a year maybe that I miss, and other than that, I'm doing it every single day.
Yeah. And no pressure to those who think, oh, if I don't do it every day, I'm like falling back. Just like pick it up. It's okay.
That's it. That's it. Every day begins a new day to opportunity to do it. No pressure.
Hmm.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Let me track back again to Fordham.
Hmm.
Mm, so as a sports psychologist, I believe you had like multiple maybe contracts or however you were working with like universities, and
Multiple teams. Yep.
you're also working with Washington Mystics for so many years. Any
Yep.
other women NBA team?
I worked prior with the Connecticut Sun before I started with the Mystics, and did a season also with the Washington Wizards as well.
Yeah. And so this is just like a learning lesson from my experience, maybe for someone who's listening, because yes, I took the opportunity, I worked with you, but you know what was a very important part? I didn't fully open to you. Like, remember
Oh,
when let's say one of my biggest challenges, maybe like my relationship, like I didn't even
oh
bring you
yeah.
into that
Yes,
huge
yes,
part of my life until like my senior year.
yes, yes,
So
yes. That is true.
it's like I just want to encourage someone who is taking these opportunities, just like just tell how it is, like, because that's gonna impact the progress another level. And so it's just like I delayed this whole experience with working
You
with you.
know, thank you for saying that, and to everybody that ever attempts to work on themselves, whether it's through sports psychology, whether it's through therapy, however you're doing it is a bit scary. And there are these parts of ourselves that we're like, that's the part that I keep hidden from everything, everyone, for whatever reasons that we have for that. And again, I would say, no judgment. I get it. And yet, the whole, if you look at this work, sports psychology, performance psychology, therapy, man, the more vulnerable you can get, the more you're going to get from it. And it is the one space of life where it's really, truly your choice. If you're working with a strength coach, on the physical self, they can see what you are doing or what you're not doing. They can see it, right? You're not doing the things I'm asking. You're physically not doing them, or you're not, or I can see what your weight is and your height and what amount of weight that you can lift and all those things. But this is the one thing that nobody else can see but you. And so you have to make that choice to allow that person to help you with that. And in fairness to you, maybe there was something that I did somewhere along the line, or other experiences that you had. I'm not, but like that made you say it's going to take me. I trust him for 80%, 90%, but he's got to give me a little bit more before I trust him for that last 10, 20%. And that's fair as well.
Hmm. Right. But I think it's like, mm, it mostly comes from me, like just like surrendering the vulnerability, or like just, really saying if something is bothering me, even though, like, I don't know, I'm hesitant talking about it or fearful or whatever. I mean, it's so crucial to express it and give it a chance. But I had my reasons. I don't know, blockages, just like maybe not the right timing. I wasn't ready, but just like I want to encourage, it's not gonna be worse, especially with therapists, psychologists, specialists in this field. Like, they get you. They want you to be vulnerable as much as you can, and will support you no matter what.
One of the things that I tell people all the time, and I feel that this is a truth, is what sounds either bad or harsh or horrible in here actually changes a lot when it comes out of when we finally say it. It's like we think how horrible it is here in silence, but when we actually share it, it ends up being not nearly as bad as what we think it could be. And I see it. I mean, I've seen it over and over again for a long, long time now with, client after client where they're just like, they share it and sometimes they'll even laugh. There was something they wouldn't share and then they say it and they laugh and they're almost laughing at the fact, not what they said per se, but like the fact that they thought it was so bad to share and then they do it and they're like, oh my gosh, it wasn't that bad at all to share.
Mhm.
But it is a reminder that it's hard. The process is not always easy.
Yeah. Okay. I always had this thought in my mind. Also why, you know, sometimes I think there was a hesitation in me fully opening up to our work together was because I wasn't sure how much you are sharing with the coach.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like how much coaches are involved in knowing like what's going on with their players, cuz I think there's like a fine line. You know, when you go to like completely different psychologists, separate, third party, not related, it's different when you are working with someone within the team. So can you clear this up, maybe help us to understand?
Well, the first thing I will say is that, and I hope, well, I make sure that every time I sign a contract with a group, that I tell them, even though you are the payer, the athlete or the client, it's because now I do some work in corporate world, is the client. So the confidentiality rides with them, not with the payer. So I make sure that I explain that up front. And if they say, well, we're going to want information, then I won't do it. I just won't do
Mm,
it. Um, but you're hitting on something that I think, and I've even had players who did, probably work with me, so we developed a relationship, but some would say, every now and again, or they'd give me like, Stu, like it's always a concern. Not that they don't trust me, but I'll be in meetings sometimes with coaches, or I'll just be on the sideline and I'm talking to coaches. And that is part of it is me also, being there for them. So I will often also work with coaching staff, that are wanting to learn more. And building their trust and their rapport with them so that they know that they should or can refer a player to me or tell me, something's going on. I think you should check in with a player. So it is important, but you keep the firewall pretty strong.
mm,
That being said, I can't lie to you and say that sometimes I would say 90% of the work that I do that I think is like, wow, we're really, really like we are working right now
mm,
is with my individual clients and not necessarily my team clients, which doesn't mean that I haven't had some of the ones the team that have worked unbelievably hard and have, I think, been really forthcoming. And I have wonderful relationships with many players that I've worked with over the years, and and it has been good work, good relationship, trusting relationships, and I don't want to indicate otherwise. But I do hear you on there are times where I've had players that have said, Stu, I love the team sessions, but I'm going to work with somebody outside because, again, not even because of anything you've done, it just feels weird for me. And I'm like, I get it. I mean, what am I supposed to say? Like, I understand. And that there is forever going to be probably that little bit of um, hesitation sometimes, maybe from athletes. I think I understand that for sure. Who
mhm.
knows how I would have felt if the roles were reversed?
Right. Maybe extra reassurance would help. Like just stating, this is between us. Like even when coaches attempt to, you know, ask how is this player doing or what did they tell you, you just hold your integrity and you got their back.
Yeah, I mean, here's how I look at it. There's no way I could be doing what I've done this many years and not have done it pretty solid in that
Mhm.
regard. Um, and every season, when we do our first session of the team session where we introduce what this is and what my role is and all that, I always make sure to reiterate exactly that.
Mhm.
And then typically when I start working with the individual, I make sure to let them know that again, this is how this works.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and that's I think it's just that, and I think it's just proving yourself over years. I think is a big like that's also a big part of it is just you know player knowing like hey and actually talking to one another. I think that maybe is the most powerful is when players are talking to one another and saying I've worked with them for years and I trust them completely. I think that's the greatest review you can get.
Mm, I have definitely questions. I'm just thinking if there's anything in regards to, our work together during boredom, or maybe anything that's on your mind, kind of like your observations or some opinions or feedback um, that comes to your mind. If not,
This
I'll.
this isn't specific to that time, although it is because it was the truth then and it's the truth now, which is I think in general the field and I'll say the field of performance sport psychology, but also the field of coaching. So both need to do a much better job in teaching around the healthy development of the environment for performance. Um, you know, I think it's almost crazy when I look at it now, after all these years, that the requirement to be a head coach at the collegiate level, I and higher, quite honestly, but certainly at the collegiate level, should be at least a master's degree in education or psychology or both. Just like you would ask for a professor in the school to have a certain level of degree, because I think like until you really understand, and again, because you've done your work in neuroscience and understanding like cognitive load, right? Like if a brain has reached saturation, then you
Mhm.
can yell at somebody, scream at players. You could, if you've practiced for 2 hours and they're not getting it, 3 hours isn't going to be when they get it. They're done. And understanding that, understanding, um, stress and understanding good stress. So when is stress helpful in the process of development? And you have to put a certain level of um, stress on all of people to for them to grow and develop and learn, right? Because if not, you're not pushing beyond anything. But if you put once too much stress and pressure gets placed, then it has the opposite effect, and it's now going into an anxiety state, and there's no learning or development happening.
Mhm.
So, but if you've never been taught any of that, and you have no understanding of that, you have no understanding of the brain, as a coach, you're just going to push, or you're just going to do what was done to you. Um, and it's often counterproductive. Um, and to a certain degree, sometimes maybe that same exact logic can apply to players as well. Like that's why players should take advantage. I mean, my opinion is everybody should take advantage of it because there's nothing bad about it. It's only good for you. It's development. And because you don't understand your own self often. I mean, how many 18-year-olds have a really good self awareness and not only self awareness, but then how do I regulate myself when I realize that I'm not regulated?
Mhm.
Almost none. So the whole, like going back to the concept of both fields, need to just say, what are we doing? If we really want to do this in a way that's, A, healthy and good, just there, good experience and healthy, we should know this. But if we actually want to achieve at a really high level, like, because we know that, especially Division One, but Division Two and Division Three coaches want to win as well. It's not like they don't want to win. Uh, so we know that winning is going to be an important part of all this. So you still want to know this information. Like, it's still good for you. So I just like that is a big push that I want to do now, is
Mhm.
really making sure that um, the people that are in charge of creating the environment of learning and growth
Mhm.
really understand the concepts behind learning and growth. If you don't, like, why nobody's an expert in that unless they've learned something. That's not something you just know how to do.
Yeah. I give you a high five right now, virtual, because this is exactly in the past months what I've been reflecting on. Because, yes, I have my own experiences, but also clients I work with. And I'm thinking about school settings and coaches and athletes. So, when you're a coach or a teacher, when you have this authority position, and you're working with vulnerable people who are kids or young adults who don't even have fully developed brain at that time, you really have to be educated and do some self work as well, so you can help them to grow and coach them in a good way, not to make them break and mm, not affect them negatively. It's just like so important. I also like I'm thinking like how many people are in these positions, and sometimes they do more harm than good because they just don't have the education or the help themselves. They don't they just how can you even know how to act when you haven't been even educated on that or helped out on that?
Yes, I mean it is. I mean and again, it's a hard job. Like, I don't want to make the job of a college coach is an incredibly hard job, but not
Mhm.
knowing these things makes it much harder, because the other part of it, like you said, around even the support for them. So, because it is hard, it is stressful, it is anxiety producing. They have so much pressure on them. If they
Mhm.
don't win, they're going to get fired, and now they have to uproot potentially their children from, the school system that they're in, and because now they have to take a job somewhere across the country for the next coaching job. There's a lot of pressure on them, and it, really everything that we know up to a certain point, if we haven't done any other learning, is what we were given, right? All we know is what we were given from our families, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not.
Mhm.
And yet, if and again, as you know, as someone that's done all the work that you've done, on yourself, but also in studies, is the brain just loves to create patterns. So it's going to use the pattern that it understands, not the pattern that's best. So if it's done this since you were 8 years old, it's going to continue to do that same pattern until it's acted upon.
Mhm.
So many coaches, the internal dialogue that they have, the pressure they put themselves under, what impact does stress and anxiety have on them and their decision making, is all goes back to what they learned, how they may have experienced it, good or bad, as an 8-year old, 9-year old, 10-year old, 12-year, whenever. All that stuff is no different for them than it is for the young athlete or the people they're coaching or anybody else in any other profession, right? We're all just moving
Mhm.
along until we say, you know what, I need to understand myself better, how groups function, whatever, all of that. Learning, none of that is just intuitive. It's just
Mm.
not the way it goes. And we don't have much discussion on it in any other venue of life.
Yeah. Can I mention that sometimes, like, I think every single person, like in this lifetime, it's just like our part of being, like getting to know ourselves, our triggers, and just like personal
Yes,
development and for anyone. But like, I think what often stands, um, kind of blocks this approach of like getting to know yourself or self reflection and personal development is one, ego, and two, maybe like fear of even like facing that. Yeah.
absolutely.
So just like
Both.
drop it. It's okay. It's good to, be vulnerable or weak and acknowledge that you don't know everything, or that there are parts that you can definitely learn from yourself or experiences.
That's why the discussion around mental health has been so good. I think that really amazing, incredible athletes that have achieved things that are beyond amazing. The Simone Biles and the Michael Phelpses and the Kevin Loves and the DeMar DeRozans and whoever else has, Naomi Osaka, like any of these people that have achieved at the highest possible levels beyond, the one percenters, basically. Um, those discussions have been so important because it's made people understand that no, there's people that are achieving at these unbelievable levels and still have are acknowledging I needed so much more support to in order to do this in a way that was like good for me, didn't break me down. But we need to move beyond the acknowledgement and the awareness and the discussion, and we have to set up real um, application, and that application probably should start at the youth levels. Um, and the downside is that funding is always going to be the issue. Like, are we putting our money where our mouths are? We're now talking about all these things. Great, wonderful to talk about it. Do people have access to it? Because the talking about it breaks down some of the stigma, but then they have to be able to go somewhere. It's just, like, now, okay, now I'm willing to talk, but where do I go? Like, and how do I do it? And is it, affordable? And that's a whole other part of the equation that we have to get better at.
Mm. But this all is like about the system, the organization. Like, this just reminds me of, like, let's say, Latvian national team or like Latvian Federation of Basketball.
Hmm.
Like, having on the mental side hasn't been like a thing at all. Like, they just don't even consider this as a
Part of it.
necessity.
Hmm.
And until it becomes as this is as important as physical training, it's not gonna change that much, I think.
You're right. Which is why people like you, who both have
You
done the playing part, that may be involved in a Latvian national team, at some point in your playing career or wherever, right? Anybody, and then have done this part of the learning, the actual study, because what you would tell them is the brain is the body. So if you believe in having a conditioning coach or a strength coach or a trainer to heal the physical, how are you separating the brain from the physical? They are one system. They're not two systems. They are one. And that's the way it has to be thought of.
Mhm,
The physical self will not perform without the cognitive emotional self. It won't,
mhm,
or it won't at its peak for sure. So you can be fully cardiovascularly fit, strength fit, balance, symmetric. You can have all the things, right? But if the cognitive emotional part is not balanced, it's going to have a negative impact on all the other stuff. And vice
mhm,
versa, if the physical is not working at the moment, then it will have a negative on the cognitive emotional.
mhm. But, like, no, being in this field, and we both can share probably the experiences, but, like, for the most part, when, let's say a basketball team, 12 players, they're all physically, like, good at that level. Like, they are
Hmm.
capable of. but not everyone is playing at their level. And so we don't include like injured players. Yes, maybe you have ankle or knee injury, but like if you're physically healthy, but you're not performing, then what's the issue?
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
something emotionally, mentally, like, and we need to stress and talk about this until it clicks in everyone's brain who are at those positions to make any decisions in organizations, that is just like non-negotiable. Like it's just like one entity, interchangeable, mind, body. And
Period.
once
Yeah.
those organizations really pay attention to both sides, they have better results. It's like a fact. But
Yeah. I mean,
can you
and
wake
I
up
hear.
other people?
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm trying, and yeah, and I'll say I'm going to give the whole profession, the whole field. It has evolved so much since the time I started till now. It has evolved so much and so well. So we're making the move, in my opinion, just not quite quick enough, and there's still the outliers who don't understand it, don't believe in it. I think that's actually at this point more fear and ego, like you mentioned, rather than like believing that there's a science to it all. Um, but letting somebody in, I think, creates a little bit of worry for some. But the bottom line is, if we don't, when you mentioned everybody's physically capable. I mean, obviously there are people who are more physically capable sometimes, so that might be. But I've heard so many coaches say, "Well, you have to be confident. You have to be confident in yourself. It's not my job." And I just completely disagree with that. Which I don't mean to say that it's all the coach's job either. It's not that it's a joint process. It would be the equivalent of saying it's not my job for you to be a good basketball player, soccer player, whatever the sport is. It's your job. Well, no, you're the coach. It is part of your job. It's not only your job. They need to work hard too. But if it wasn't your job, then they don't need a coach.
Hmm.
It is your job. And how you talk, how you interact, how you set up an environment, how you treat people that are the ones that maybe aren't at the top of the, roster is going to impact how much and how far they can work their way towards the top of the roster or be prepared the next season. Maybe this isn't the season that they're going to, but the next one is. And so what are you doing with them and how are you interacting with them? Which doesn't mean that you have to go, there are parts of this that are certainly the individuals. There's no doubt about that. And that's why I say everybody should take advantage of they have the opportunity to work with a sports psychologist. But it's hours together. And until that concept is better understood, like, well, you just have to be. That's a ridiculous statement. There's no way that's the way things work. You just have to be. It's not a yeah, and you just have to be the greatest coach that ever lived. That's what I'll
Hmm.
say back. And
Hmm. Hmm.
are you? Well,
Hmm.
no, I'm not there yet. But okay. Well, then don't. That's the equivalent. Like, but I'm still willing to play for you, even though you're not the greatest coach that ever lived. But you know, I need something back from you just as much as you need something back from me. And I think till we get there, we're always going to be treading water a little bit.
Hmm. And to add on that, okay, let's say they are recruiting like a very good player who seems to be very confident playing at their level, like top players. And then they come in and it's a different experience and different coaches and environment, and they start to lose confidence. So yes, you had that confident player, but something happened. So there needs to be involvement and work together. And how can a coach, like maybe you can share like some examples of how can a coach help player to feel more confident, like maybe some phrases or experiences or case studies, stories, I mean.
Well, I don't know if I have a perfect case study or story for it, but what I would say is I do think that there are some things that are foundationally good. One is to care, period, about the person. It's not rocket science. Is that person, the human being, valuable to you
Mm.
beyond what they can produce for you? So you don't have to play everybody equal minutes. You should, if you have 12 people, 13 people, 14 people, I get it. It's, they're very busy and blah, 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 but you should be able to care for them. You should be able to show care because I think a big impact is when players just feel like I don't exist. I am not relevant in this person's eyes because I'm not giving them this amount of points per game.
Mhm.
So start there. Just make sure that even when they're not playing, that you still are like, hey, how classes, how are you doing? How's your family? Whatever. Just to let them know that they exist. They're still a human being, that you care about them. And further, when you do see them, maybe that you can just tell that they have the weight of the world on their shoulders at the moment, that you actually ask them, how are you doing? What's going on? I can see it. They don't, most players, I think, understand that you can't play everybody equally. But asking them actually how they're doing, because I can tell something's bothering you, will go a long way when that player is not uh, getting the minutes that they were hoping for, or having the experience that they envisioned in their head that this thing was going to be. I think listening, not to agree all the time, but
Mhm.
listening to understand is important for coaches to do. So I understand why that bothers you. I don't agree per se that that's going to be like that. I see it a little bit differently. We don't have to agree, or we don't have to agree on how many minutes. Well, I believe I should be playing this many. Well, I think we should play in this many, but I understand where you're coming from. So listening to understand, I think those are big things. And then our words are like just the basics of teaching of how to understand how to focus on high level performance. So I have a belief in everything that we do should be in the present. So we should be talking about the present, not, we can review the previous game, learn from it, and now it's over. So if the next 3 days in practice you screwed this up 3 days ago, you're forcing their brain to go backwards and relive mistakes,
Mhm.
nor go forward. So don't say the next 3 games are really big games for us. Nope, today's big for us. So teaching them how to really focus, being present, those 3 games will take care of themselves if we take care of each individual day. Talking to them in terms of understanding that what we only have to focus on is what we have control over, or at least some heavy control over. So we don't have control over winning, but we do have control over how we prepare to win. And so you, day in and day out, teaching that, living it as a coach, teaching them how to think in those terms. And then maybe the biggest one, which is learning how to detach from judgment. And the judgment that I see is players judging themselves. So most players are hyper self-critical. They're very hard on themselves. A lot of players will be worried about outside noise, outside themselves, opinions,
Mhm.
whether it be social media related, whether it be fans, whether it be hangers on around the program, sometimes even parents. But who are the people that you should be listening to? And what is noise?
Mhm.
And then comparison. Don't compare them. Don't tell them about a previous team. Don't tell them about another player. Teach them to see themselves in an honest way. Where are they now? How do they grow? And that's it. They may
Mhm.
never reach what somebody else did, or they may outpass. outgain somebody else, but it really doesn't matter because it's still only them. It's only their journey. And if you can do that, if you can care, if you can listen, and then your daily words are present within their control and detaching from these judgments, and you're modeling those as well, that's going to create a probably pretty good environment. And yet, nothing about that asks for less demand or less expectation of effort and commitment and focus. I didn't say anything about any of that, but these are really solid foundational principles for creating good minds and good environments.
Yeah. You mentioned very good examples. And mm, I'll tell you this. So, comparison just kills the joy because so many times, and it hurts me so deeply because I've never experienced on my own, on myself that a coach would compare me. Oh, you're not as good as this player. I can't remember such
Hmm.
situation, but I'm working with athletes at high level, and I hear this so often. And I do have to say, North America, like US, Canada, way better about this. But in Europe, like coaches often say, you are not playing like this player. Or they go around to other teammates and like comparing those two players and saying, oh, this player is like not as good as that one was. And it really kills you as a player, like the belief in yourself, like the confidence level. And then another thing that really separates Europe a little bit with North America is like these personal attacks. When coaches are frustrated, like they often would say, you're dumb, you're like this and that, more making it about the person, not about the situation.
Hmm.
And that also is, I think, is very wrong and just need to change. Um, yeah, my 2 cents.
No, you're dead on. And just to piggyback what you said around the the comparison or how you speak about or to an athlete, I think often what is behind that from coaches is that they actually are trying to put you into a state of fear and or stress because in the short term, fear and stress are motivators right there. They do push us, right? If I don't know if you're in a building and you hear a loud noise and then somebody yells there's a gun, probably, and they say get out, everybody will probably run, right?
Hmm.
Because of the fear. Now, is that a good experience? Is that, how long will they be able to run? At some point it's going to break down. It's not a good. But if 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 you want something to happen in a hurry, fear is a good motivator. The problem is it is not a sustainable motivator. But often it's like the easiest, it's the simplest. Quite
Hmm.
honestly, it's the most amateurish, if I'm being honest, motivator. But it is a motivator. And that's often what's beneath those comments and those words and those ways of being is that I want to get there faster instead of I want to sustain something for the long term.
Hmm.
And but it's actually the lowest form of motivation, the most simplistic form of motivation. I think that's important to understand both um, by the player of understanding kind of what's happening, why are they using it, but also I think it's important for the coaches to understand you're kind of using the most simplistic form, the most amateurish form of motivation when that's the one. Now, I'm not saying you never need to use it, by the way. It can be a tool periodically, but if that's the only tool that you have, it's the most amateurish tool you could be using.
So, what are the situations that come to your mind where it would be beneficial? in
I think
athletics?
yeah, I think I always try to think of like, let's say a timeout in a game, and the other team just went on a 10-0 run. Coach calls timeout, players come over. If it is because that you can see your team is highly stressed, like overwhelmed, then they're going too fast. So you want to have them hit the brake, right, and slow down. So in that case, you would not want to use fear because they're already going too fast. You would actually probably talk to them about, hey, we're okay. How about we all take a quick breath here? Let's focus in. We're going to run this coming out of, you know, out of the
Mhm.
timeout. Okay. But in times where you're like, God, we are lethargic, they're not giving effort, blah, 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 that might be where a coach lays into the group and kind of gets the adrenaline going and gets them fired up. Because again, you're looking for that short term burst at that moment. So maybe in that moment, that might be where it works. But the problem is, or the issue is, that the coach has to read that situation. Why is it that the team isn't playing particularly well? If you notice that they're scattered, they're throwing the ball away, they look like deer in the headlights, fear is only going to make that worse. So yelling is going to make that worse. Often what I see is coaches only know the yell in that, and so they're not looking to see what do they need. They're just, this is all I have, so this is what I'm going to do in this moment.
Mhm.
And it gives them the opposite effect.
Yeah.
But if there is that time where you just feel like you need to wake them up a bit,
Mhm.
let's say you're in practice, it's middle of the season, it's cold if you're in the Northeast or wherever where you were, um, and it's dark, people had class all day, and you could just see they're just not fully, the energy's not there. Yeah, you can lay into them a little bit. Come on, let's go, get into them.
Mhm.
That's where it works. But if it's all ever, it's just, it loses its impact, by the way, as well. So then it stops being even effective.
Right, because you get conditioned to it, and
It's like kids who get yelled at all the time by their parents. Over time, it no longer works. They're just like, yeah, my parents yell all the time, so
mm,
they stop listening.
mhm. Right. Okay. Mm. Speaking of like coaches and what do you think about situations, because I'm sure you've been there, where you're working with a team and you're helping them to, level up and get better results as a team, but coach is just like narrowly looking at the team as the issue and not ready to invest anything in themselves to help out the whole process. Any thoughts about that? How to work around it?
Yeah, it's really hard. I'm just going to say this. Most of the time, especially at this point in my career, I am going to have that conversation up front in terms of like just be open to it if at some point during the season I'm making a recommendation that maybe includes you, how we are really delivering our coaching and instruction,
Mm-hmm.
and feedback. So I'm kind of laying the groundwork before it even, is needed, let's say. Um, but it's hard. I mean, that's when you're in a scenario like that, the best analogy I can give is that at that point the sports psychologist's job becomes to help them tread water. You're just keeping the players' heads above water, but you're not moving forward. So if a head coach is utilizing this service, this segment of the performance model, then they take advantage of it, right? Don't just kind of ignore it and say I can do whatever I want and they just have to deal with it, because it doesn't work that way. That sometimes what you have is the best that you're doing is just keeping them afloat for another day of practice or another game, but not moving them forward. But you want to
Mhm.
move them forward, right? You, coach, want them to move forward. And if
Mhm.
part of that includes that the practice is so chaotic, so loud, so stress inducing that they literally cannot absorb more information. They cannot process more information. Then we have to talk about that part of it because you want them to learn more, but they can't learn more because they're in this chaotic, loud, crazy environment. Again, think of a classroom that's loud and chaotic. How great of the learning process is going to be
Mhm.
going on in that classroom,
Yeah.
as opposed to the classroom where they can hear, they can digest, they can answer, they can process, right? If they can, they're probably going to learn more.
Mhm. Just need to be more open to working together because it's like I can compare this to, let's say, a parent gets like a therapist for their kid and just like leaves it to therapist, like deal with it, like solve their
Hmm.
issues. However, probably the issues at the core come from the parenting. And so similar
Or at least
situation.
are connected with, right? It's
Mhm.
not, and again, one of the greatest things I think we can possibly attempt to do is to, as often as we possibly can. Obviously, there are scenarios where it is egregious on one side or the other, right? It's players really behavior is horrible and
Mhm.
the way they're doing things, or the coach is unbelievably horrible and blah blah blah. Most of the time, that's not the case. And if we can kind of get the conversation to be that we are on the same team, we're in this together. This is us together. It is not me blaming you, nor is it should be you guys blaming us as coaches. Like we should, the environment should be such that we are literally in this together. So the communication is kind of flowing back and forth. Now, ultimately, the head coach always has the final say, right? That's their job. That's why they get paid to make those final decisions
Mhm.
and big picture decisions and things like that. But in a perfect scenario, or at least not even perfect, but just good, there is an exchange of information and feedback that it happens where there's like, oh, yeah, actually that makes sense. I didn't think of it from that lens, you know. Or yeah, I hear you, but we're still going to do it this way. But I hear you. I understand what you're saying. Maybe I can think about that, take a look at it. But for this, I want you to do it this way still. But the environment allows for that back and forth.
Mhm.
And that's the important part, that the environment allows for it. Not that it is always going to go in the direction that one or the other wants it to go, but that it allows for it.
Yeah. And I want to give shout out and credits to assistant coaches because their role is so important on a team. And sometimes I feel like, depending on the situation, whether because of the head coach or their own insecurities or just like something, but mm, they're so important to the team and they can help so much and just need to step out on their roles and fulfill those roles. And they are as important as everyone else on the team. And it's just like, yeah, maybe someone needs to hear this, but it's an amazing opportunity to really connect with the players and learn from the head coach and just like make the most of it and not belittle themselves or like settle down for, I don't know, feeling that they're worthless.
I completely agree with you. I think assistant coaches have such an important job, but such a hard job because they do have to push and hold players accountable and carry out the mission of the head coach, right? Or vision of the head coach. And to a certain degree, most assistants want to become a head. right?
Mhm.
Or they even want to move up the ladder in their own coaching staff. So the boss, who is the head coach, they want them to feel favorably towards them so that they either give them a good recommendation to go to another program or move up the ladder within their own program. So they're balancing being great to the players, teaching, helping the players, with also making sure their boss stays happy. Um, and that puts them in all sorts of challenging positions as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, shout out to the assistants because they really they carry a lot of the load in many ways, especially around I think the player experience often. Like they're sometimes the lifeline of a lot of players for sure.
Mm.
Especially if they were the one that recruited that player to the program. Because they have that deeper, like I was the one telling you come here, it's going to be good, and so they have that deeper commitment to like, oh, I can tell it's not been good, and it's my job to help get them through here a little bit.
Mm. Responsibility, kind of.
Yeah.
Okay. And since you have experience with youth and university level and women NBA and like top level of sports, mm, if you had to compare, like let's say athletes in women NBA and athletes in youth or college, are their problems really that different?
No. The at the very core, the teaching and what has to be developed is actually very similar. The difference is as the athlete moves to higher and higher levels, the differentiation, like the problems are less physical and become actually more mental, right? If you're working with a 14-year-old, no matter how good they are for a 14-year-old, they're still early in the development process. So there's greater fluctuation in their what they're going to produce daily. When you get to a 30-year-old pro who's been doing it for decades at this point and then has learned how to do routines with consistency and they know how to do film and they just know how to take care of their bodies, at that point they're very skilled and they're extremely knowledgeable in how to perform at a very high level consistently.
Hmm.
So the biggest difference is there's less physical fluctuation as you move up. They're all going to be good. They're all actually essentially experts at the highest levels. And then that's where actually the mind becomes so much of a differentiator. At the youth levels, they're learning many of the same things. So the problems that the brain can run into are really no different, but you're actually trying to help them establish these healthy understandings and how to manage all this while they're also pretty there's a lot of variation in their own performance just simply because they're not quite yet at that higher
Hmm.
expert level of skill. They're still developing skill while developing mental skills. Whereas not that pros stop developing skills, but it's the growth becomes like that instead of like this when we're young. When we're young, the growth in physical skill can be massive. Once you reach a certain level, they're really tiny, increases, and that's where the mind really becomes a differentiator.
And let's say Washington Mystics, for example, are the players like open to sports psychology and just like this mental development, mental game? Are they more open perhaps than younger generations?
Um, so it's weird for me because I've been with the group for so long
Mm.
that it's become just part of who we are. So um, the quick answer is yes, very open, very um, it's changed. I think the landscape has changed. So not just that I've been there and a lot of the players have been there and all that. So it's made it more open. But the landscape has changed. We talk about it differently now than we ever did before. So the stigma has gone down a bit. So that's helped tremendously. Interestingly, our head coach and GM, the prior group, was fired this past at the end of the season. So we have new coach and new GM, and the roster is also changing. So I guess we're going to find out what the openness level is because I think there's going to be, there's a new, we had a lot of continuity for the last, let's say, 8 years. And I think so that's going to be different this season. So we'll see how quickly we can kind of get it back up. But I actually do think that um, it has changed a lot, and I think pros right now are much more open because I think they are now really seeing it as just exactly what I said, which is um, the differentiation in skill level is is really not going to be that great. Where the difference is can you really, really understand what you do to yourself, why we do these things to ourselves, and can you learn how to regulate it when it starts to get in your way? And so they recognize, like, okay, well, if I can do that, that's a difference maker. And I think the ones that want to have a long career and a successful career are way more open to that than ever before.
Mhm. Well, that's also a little bit relieving, I think, for some to hear that, because I think when you're younger, you just think, oh, it's just like the end of the world, and all those problems are just like no one else are experiencing anything like this. And so it's a little bit reassuring, I think, for some to hear that no, even like at the top level, there are very similar things and mental game things that people go through.
You know, I think probably the biggest misunderstanding is that people are confident or not confident. And really, confidence is always a bit situational. So if I've been somewhere for a long time, I've been rewarded for my behavior, my actions, how I do things. If I know the landscape, um, I know what to expect day in and day out. My confidence level is going to be higher because of all those things. But you take that same person and now you put them into a brand new scenario. They're not getting that same feedback. They don't know the routines and the systems. They don't know the other people around them, and they lose confidence. Now, they might not lose all of their confidence, but there will be a variation based on the situation, right? What are they in right now? Is this an environment that I'm familiar with? Is the thing that I'm even being asked to do the thing that I'm actually good at, or is the thing that I'm being asked to do just one team over? That's not actually my strong suit, but that's what they require from this position in this system. It's going to change their level. And so I agree with you. I think the biggest thing for young people to understand, or for parents to understand, or youth coaches to understand, is that sometimes we're super confident when we're 14 years old because we're just bigger, faster, stronger, and more skilled than all other 14-year-olds. And then we get bumped up to the 16-year-old team, and we're no longer bigger, faster, stronger, and no, we're not as confident as we were because we can't get away and do the same things that we did at that level. It's situational, but it's not just everything that they do. It's going to be exactly the same. The situation that they're in is going to have some level of impact on how we feel and think. Again, this is why we should be studying these, and there should be more education for everybody in these spaces.
Yeah. If you mm, had to, if you had the power right now to like remove all the like stigma around mental health in sports or focusing on mental performance, like what would you say? Like, how could we help the listeners, people? Like, what would you say to kind of defend, in a sense, your profession or just like raise the urgency around it a little bit?
I think that I would say that if you needed your team to be in great shape for being able to perform, would you wait till the second game, third game, fourth game, fifth game of the season to do conditioning? Or would you do conditioning long before the season began? Until we begin to think about the mind being conditioned, we're just conditioning the mind, just like you're willing to condition the body. Until we get there, that's how I think that's I don't even want to call it defense. I think it's just the understanding
Hmm.
of this. That's all this is. There is no difference in that. There's zero difference. That's all we're asking. And here's the thing. We do strength and conditioning to get better, right? That's one of the reasons we do strength and conditioning. But one of the other reasons that we do strength and conditioning is to prevent injury.
Hmm.
Fair?
Yeah.
If you are stronger and better conditioned, the likelihood of getting injured goes down. Doesn't mean won't happen. Obviously, it happens all the time where people still get injured even when they are completely physically fit and strong. But it does decrease the likelihood. And then even if you do get injured, if you've been doing it, the likelihood of recovering from the injury is higher because you've been stronger and better conditioned. And the mind is no different. Where we can prevent greater clinical levels of mental health issues if we condition the mind prior. Now, we cannot get rid of it per se, just like we can't get rid of injuries. Sometimes there will be things that will still happen that will allow for clinical anxiety to show up or clinical levels of depression to show up in an individual that even if they did wonderful mental skills prior. But I think the likelihood of the clinical of becoming a clinical level if we did conditioning prior to the clinical issues manifesting, we would probably find that we're limiting the number of clinical issues slash even the intensity if it does reach that level. And I don't see any reason why this is a hard concept to understand, and I don't see any reason why we can't explain it this way and get there. We just need to have these conversations as many times as we possibly can with as many people that are of in the influential positions in these organizations and universities, and whether it be youth organizations or collegiate programs, and including up to professional level.
Thank you. That is a valuable piece of advice, and I completely agree. I think it's also just like education, like it's difficult to understand or agree to something when you don't understand it. Like, it's
Yeah,
just like difficult
exactly.
to implement it if you
Absolutely.
don't understand the concept. And I think education and just like intellectual conversations around it are helpful.
There's no, there's, it has to begin there, which then
Mhm.
goes back to why I feel like all collegiate coaches should have to have master's degree level in at least education, if not education in psychology. That way, there's at least some level of at least being exposed to these concepts. Now they can take those concepts and say, if that's the case, how do I make that into part of my coaching philosophy? But if you've never been even exposed to those theories and understanding, why would you try to put it into your philosophy? Unless, of course, that you just intuitively get it. And I do think that there are some times where you just see certain coaches just like they intuitively get the process of teaching and care and trust and all those things. They're just good at it. Just like some people, are just like, man, like I practice shooting all the time and that person can just shoot. Like they just something makes sense when the ball comes out of their hand in a way that is just different than other people. You know, I think Steph Curry's put a lot of time into shooting, but I think something within him just is like it just is different. And it was different because his dad was a great shooter. Somewhere in the DNA, it got passed along to him, and he just had an advantage. And then he worked really, really hard to make it even greater.
Hmm. Okay. Is there anything else on your mind that you feel like, okay, you have this opportunity to speak your opinion or share the message for wrap up? Is there anything comes to
You
your
know,
mind?
it's so funny because we didn't talk at all before this. We had no like, where are we going to head with this? And I actually think we stumbled on, however you want to say it, exactly what we have to talk about more of is how do we educate everybody involved in the performance world, um, athletic performance world, in understanding this better, really becoming educated and understanding, starting it earlier, meaning that instead of waiting for some breakdown to happen, whether it's a clinical level of breakdown or just somebody really struggling with their own self doubt and performance, we should start earlier ages and do it as a fitness of sort. We're just trying to build a fitness. Um, I think those things are the biggest. I mean, if we would just do those things, it would have such a major impact. It would have an incredible major impact.
Yeah, I agree. And we're going to do those things. And it's just another thing to talk about and not only talk about, but really, I mean, I feel deeply about it. Like it's just like my passion. It's just like my drive.
Just people that have passion for it have to get out there and be passionate about it and have these
Hmm.
conversations over and over again.
Yeah. And take off all the stereotypes and judgment around it and encourage more people to just like be open minded and explore, expand, and get better not only about like sports and athletics, but like in life because it's just like all about life. It's not only, oh, this is going to help you in sports, it's going to affect you outside of sports.
Hmm. Yes, this will continue everywhere.
Hmm. Okay. Well, yeah. I there are so many topics we did touch on, but so much more we could talk about. It's just like never ending conversation. And I'm sure we're gonna talk about it in the future. I don't think this is
Happy
the
to do
last
it
time.
again. On or off recording. I'm happy to have these conversations a million times with you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for being there for me when I needed it.
My
Um,
absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
and we'll keep in touch. And best of luck to you in personal life and career wise. And thank you, Stu. Truly,
Thank
thank you.
you so much. Thank you so much.